So Caron, you worked at Tower Records at Watt and El Camino back in the mid-'80s.
Right.
So tell me about that experience.
It was enjoyable. You know, I was the CD buyer, and gave me access to a lot of music that I wouldn't have probably normally, had access to. It was when CDs kind of first, I don't want to say they first came out, but it was when people were replacing their record collections with CDs. So they sold really well. So it was a nice thing to do.
Were there listening booths yet?
No, this was before. This was after the original listening booth back ages ago, and before, I guess, more current ones. Now this was pre-computer and everything. I mean, this was pretty.
I remember the mid-'80s, and I may have even talked with you on the phone because I used to, call record stores when I worked at Quad, and I got the local weekly sales.
Right.
And I remember I was really stubborn with CDs. Like, I didn't really replace my vinyl until the early 90s.
Right. I was a little stubborn myself.
Because I always liked vinyl until I was thoroughly convinced eventually that CDs last longer.
Well, I was convinced that, the CD section shrunk to a couple of little places in the store at that time. So really, not everybody was putting music out on vinyl anymore. So
that's true.
So it really closed your options there if you stuck to vinyl.
That was actually the store that I went to growing up while I went to Rio Americano. We both went to the same high school.
Right.
I would go there after school, and that's where I bought my first albums. So, that was late 70s when I did that. But I still lived in the area and shopped at Tower at Watt and El Camino while you worked there. That was still my #1 store.
Right. Yeah, no, I think other musicians, all musicians that I actually probably know at one time or other probably worked at Tower. Let's see, when I was there, John McRae, from Cake, he was there, and
from Cake.
Yeah, I think everybody I worked with pretty much was a musician.
What did John McRae do there?
A clerk.
Okay.
He was a clerk.
So as the CD buyer, can you briefly explain what that was?
Well, CD buyer, and then back in those days they had billboard reporting. So this was before it was done, I guess, with computers. I don't know how it ended up being done, but
it became computerized.
It did. Okay.
Yeah.
We would just, I would have to figure out how much product I would have to purchase from each artist. You kind of take a little gamble. You don't know if somebody's release is going to be a good seller or not. So you have to kind of know the merchandise pretty well and know the artist pretty well, so you can make that kind of a gamble. So besides that, then there's the billboard reporting was at the end of the week, I guess. You used to have to indicate which was the best-selling record of that week, or best title. And sometimes you couldn't possibly do it because it wasn't measured by a computer. It was all in your head. You had to know, you had to sort of estimate. So there was that, and when you're a billboard reporter, all the record labels sort of want you to tell them that their artist was the #1 that week, whether they were or not. So there was a little fighting going on among with that.
So in other words, they didn't like it when you had something unique that was a big seller.
Well, yeah, they didn't. Usually it was like between the roughly like 2 or 3 artists that you could say, yeah, they outsold another artist or something. So it wasn't like you had to determine who was the best seller amongst those 3, and you really couldn't exactly. So you had to estimate. For your store, say like the #1 album of the week, did it sell in the hundreds, the thousands, the 10,000s? Wow, this was so long ago, of course, but I'd say hundreds. Maybe something sold in the thousands, but it seems like hundreds.
That sounds right to me, because at the time I would get counts from the record stores, and I was always amazed. Okay, we're giving these records so much airplay, and some of them go on to sell millions nationally. It just made me kind of baffled that not that many records sell as much as I had thought.
Right. And there was a lot of like crooked things going on back then. You know, payola wasn't really, you weren't really supposed to do that, but you know, with cash, but they did it with other things. So, so yeah, it was kind of crooked.
It's kind of like, will you report our record even though it didn't sell a single copy?
Exactly. And if you do, you can have backstage passes too, you know. Yeah,
Day on the Green.
Yeah, it was kind of crooked. But
you know, that all changed, or sort of changed, in the early 90s when Billboard went to its electronic monitoring system.
Right. Yeah.
With BDS and SoundScan, which eventually was taken over by Nielsen. So it's all electronic charts now, but it's funny that back then radio was also encouraged to report fake spins of songs in return for favors by record labels.
Right.
And they'd use third parties to kind of launder it, I guess. Quad didn't really participate in that because we were an independent station and we just wanted to do our own thing.
Oh, well, that's nice.
But what was cool about Quad and Tower is they were both kind of independent. Tower was not really a big corporation. It was more like a kind of a big independent company.
Right, right.
Where was that?
So did you get that feel? Did it seem more independent than corporate to you?
Well, it seemed a little of both. You know, it seemed like independent, but it also seemed sort of corporate. And again, I was in the store, so I wasn't in the main office. I have friends who worked in the main office who have a completely different take on things.
Yeah.
But you know, it seemed a little of both. You know, it didn't. As with all businesses, that kind of, you know, when you're in a boom, all kinds of things, you know. It's kind of like you can make mistakes and get away with it.
Yeah,
you know?
That was the heyday for Tower.
When you're in the heyday of something, you can kind of be a little more reckless.
Yeah.
And so there was probably some recklessness going on or whatever, but you know,
it worked.
It worked. It was okay. You know. So
worked better then than what happened later.
Right. You know, and you know, these are people who started out doing this for the love of doing it and had to become business people and had to really become, you know, they kind of changed that world, you know, and they were part of
well, why do you think Tower Records is still remembered today? Everywhere I turn, especially on Facebook, people are remembering Tower Records.
Well, I know from the people who work there, there's a certain nostalgia to having worked there, and you know, it's usually the time of your life when you work there when you're younger, and music is really important to you in your life, so it's, you know, imagine, I mean, having a job doing music, you know, and that's exciting, that's fun, you know, even if basically what you really are is a clerk, you know, it's still fun to have that as be the product, you know. And like I said, we were younger then, it was fun.
It's funny because when I went to Tower Records, I'd think of the clerks as icons.
Yeah, really?
Just people that knew a lot about music.
And some did. When I worked there, when I first got my job, some did. Toward the end of working there, I was shocked how little some of the clerks knew about music. So it kind of worked away, you know, got away from that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a fun, you know, it's a fun place to work, and you know, if you're a musician, it's kind of like you were so lucky in Sacramento to have that as an option, you know, because you could be around music all day long.
Thank you very much, Caron.
You bet.